Welcome to another episode of Judge for Yourself. The power and influence of South Africa's monarchies has been the discussion of many heated debates of late. Most prominent of these has to do with the Zulu king, Goodwill Zwelithini, whose controversial comments with regard to foreign nationals speculated to have sparked xenophobic attacks in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. But how relevant are traditional leaders and monarchs in South Africa? We have them, they're part of our constitutional framework, they're part of our life. The question is, in a constitutional democracy such as South Africa with its multifaceted range of guarantees, is there a place for this kind of institution? And if there is, how does it, as it were, get transformed to be congruent with our broader constitutional normative framework? If you'd like to join this debate on Twitter, use the ENCA news handle. To discuss this, we have Prince Manene Tabane from Controlesa, Nomobiso Gasa, a gender activist, and the public protector, Advocate Thuli Madonsela. Can I start with you?
Yes.
I mean, you're from Controlesa.
Yes.
So, lots of people are very upset with King Goodwill Zwelithini for what he had to say. There have been lots of articles written about that.
Yes.
So the question I wanted to ask you is, how do you reconcile a constitutional democracy of the kind we have with traditional leaders who aren't elected by anybody and then making serious statements? Whether he said what he said, I'm not interested at the moment. I'm simply saying who make pronouncements of a particular kind, and I might add, are paid for by the taxpayer, as I understand it.
Okay. Thank you, Advocate. Let me just start by saying I think even the question that is being raised today, the relevance of traditional leaders in our country, it's on its own bit irrelevant, because traditional leaders, the indigenous law has been there since time immemorial. Rather, I was expecting that the question would be, how did these two legal systems coexist?
You're free to answer that.
Yes, because we've been there quite for some time. Before the white came to South Africa, we've been using indigenous law. So if today there's going to be that question to say how relevant the traditional leaders are. But let me go further beyond that to say they are still relevant even today. If you look around the struggle when we found frontier wars, long before, struggling to get this democracy that we are in today. And when we are in today, the question rises again, how relevant are you? And yet we fought for this democracy so that we form part of that. Secondly, if you look around the issue of the cases, the role of a restorative justice that we are playing as traditional leaders, it also plays an important role in our democracy even today.
All right, let me just stop you and just break this up before I ask my other two guests. Let me just put something to you. The Constitution was voted on by 52 million people. I mean, they chose it. Nobody chose the system of traditional leaders. So the question is, doesn't the system of traditional leaders have to fit in with our chosen framework for governance, which is the Constitution?
But for the mere fact that traditional leaders are part of this Constitution, if you go to chapter 12, it talks about us. True. But our concern would be our role has been made so minimal in the Constitution, meaning that...
So you're arguing that there should be a bigger role?
Rather, we should coexist as these two different legal systems. If you talk about the Western legal system and the traditional legal system, they should coexist.
Well, what do you say about that?
I would be quite interested to know how does that coexistence look like? But let me say that, look, the fact that traditional leaders have a role to play and that they are relevant, they are still relevant in modern society is not at issue. The issue is how that is translated. You talk about since time immemorial, okay? We have a very good example. We have the Khoi, we have the Sen, right? They've had traditional institutions of traditional leadership themselves. They have them recognized by people who subscribe to them. It is through affiliation and the choice of identity, which in fact is how the institution of traditional leadership, if we have to go to pre-colonial, was existing, right? The distortion, and this is a point that is not disputed by scholars and even by traditional leaders themselves. I can refer to Nkosi Olomisa in an article that he wrote, Mchunu, Makhuleke, they do say that the role of traditional leaders is through the affiliation and the chosen identity that people have. Where it becomes a problem today is that traditional leaders are being forced on being recognized through boundaries, through land, as we see in...
Who's forcing them?
Through law, the government laws that they propose, the Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Act of 2003, which set out and said, these are traditional authorities. If you live in this area, this is the kind of
system. And what's wrong with that?
Well, a number of things. One, those boundaries overlap with the apartheid Bantustan boundaries. That's number one. Number two, it doesn't give people a right to choose, which is what the core of what the Constitution is that it says customary law, culture, religion, customary systems, and all these issues are by affiliation and by choosing. So it is important that the fact that I live here, I am not forced to recognize an institution simply because, and this, by the way, this link between traditional leaders and land and control over people is one of the key colonial distortion that we have.
I'm going to come back. Can I ask, I understand, I know you don't want to necessarily get involved in this dispute particularly, but your office gets lots of complaints, as I understand it, with regard to traditional leaders, perhaps both the traditional leaders and the community, as I understand it.
Certainly, Judge Davis. But firstly, just to explain that probably the best commission to sit in an event like this would be the CRC.
I appreciate it, but most people look to you, I'm afraid.
However, the Public Protector deals with the governance issues, and you are right, then, Judge Davis, that we get those complaints around governance, because traditional authorities are structures within the state of South Africa, and you've already said that they are paid by government. Because they are paid by government, then they automatically become employees of the state, even if they're not elected or appointed by the state. They are employees of the state, and then they're bound by the Constitution, and they're bound by all of the provisions that determine the character of the state and the values that should be used in implementing their work. The governance issues that come to us are usually around the confusion between personal property and group property, and also the confusion between what belongs to the royal family and what belongs to the community. And all of those trust things, the trust land and everything in the trust land belongs to the community, and then the king holds those in trust for the community, and often then there's confusion around that.
I want to ask you about that. I want to take a break,
yes,
but I want to come back and just so I could tease out precisely where those fault lines lie, and then I can ask the Prince as well to respond to that, but we've got to take a break first.